The recording for this meeting has begun.
Thank you for joining the Deltek Supervisor training. Before we get started, there are a few administrative items to note. The Deltek Expense Report User Guide is available for download in the upper left corner of your screen. There is also a Supervisor's Guide available as well. If you'd like to ask a question during the session, please type it in the Q&A box that's on the bottom left of your screen, and we'll try to answer as many as possible. We are also compiling all of the questions from the trainings and will be developing an FAQ document that will be shared with everyone. If you need to enlarge your presentation screen, there is a button in the upper left with 4 arrows. By clicking that button, you can go into full screen viewing mode. Beginning today, all expense reports must be submitted into the new Costpoint system. Anything that was received in the legacy system after Friday will be rejected and need to be resubmitted into the new system. If you have questions about existing expense reports that were submitted into the old system and have not been approved or processed, please send an email to the Get Expense Report team so that they can work with you to ensure it gets processed this month. Your time for this training should be charged to your overhead labor charge code, either 0601-004 or -005. The last thing before we get started, though the system for time and expense reports is changing, nothing is changing in the process regarding the types of information or documents that need to be submitted. Specific expense requirements are based on the government contract requirements, which have not changed. If you have specific questions pertaining to your contract, your supervisor will be your best resource. I'd like to now introduce Ms. Chris Fitzgerald for today's presentation.
Great, thank you. So welcome everyone. Today's session is to go over, from a supervisor's perspective, how to approve an expense report. So if you're looking at my screen right now, you'll see I have the AFSCME portal that is set up. This is the same portal that we used in the training last week for how to fill out your expense report. So I'm going to click on that link first, and we'll talk a little bit about that process. Now, hopefully you all attended the session on how to fill out your expense report that we held last week. If you didn't, I'm going to go over briefly some of the features on that. So the first thing was that portal that we just clicked on. It brings you to this portal page where you go to fill out both your timesheet and your expense report. You should have already received a couple of emails from the Deltek Cloud team that contained your user ID and a temporary password. So please set that up. That'll get you into this system when you log in. It'll give you access to your timesheet and your expense report. So both to fill out your own as well as to do approvals for your employees. So to access your expense report, on the left side of the screen, under the employee section, you'll go to the same link we talked about last week where it says enter your timesheet or expense report. And so I want to enter in a test user because they have some actual expense reports that we submitted last week that we can look at to do the approvals. So I'm going to enter in my username, and for you guys it'll be that 5-digit character. It starts with 47161 with a dot, and then the letter A for AFSCME, and then a dot, and then your employee ID. Your password, of course, is a password that you just set up on the cloud site. And the system you'll enter, I'll change this here. Okay, going forward after today, or including today, will be Magellan Health Config. So again, for our purposes today, for our training, I'm going to use the test database because I know that has some expense reports that are ready for approval. Again, at the bottom of the screen, there's the Remember the Login Information checkbox that you can check in order to save both the username and the system name. You'll have to always enter in your password each time you log in. So this is from an employee's perspective. So to fill out your expense report, again, we went through this last week. I'll very briefly go over it again. We're going to go over here to where it says Manage Expense Reports. So time and expense, expense reports, and then Manage Expense Reports. And it pulls up the last expense report that I was working on. So I'm actually going to find one. I think I have one out there that is in a draft mode. We'll find out in a second. I have several, actually. So I queried it on the upper right-hand side of the screen. And then I hit the Find button, and that brought in all of my personal expense reports that I have to fill out. So to look for your employee's expense report, we actually go to a different screen. I'm going to select one here so we can look at it and actually do an approval for it. So I'll take this trip to New Jersey, and I'm going to hit the Submit button as an employee to submit the expense report. You'll notice that at the top on the right-hand side, the status of my expense report now says Submitted. As a supervisor, you're going to want to view all of this information, make sure it's the right expense report type, identify the meaning of the expense report or the reason for the expense report, as well as the dates. All of that information is located here on the header of the expense report. Across the top, you have the Locations tab and the Default Charges tab, as well as details and any warnings regarding this expense report. By clicking on that tab, you can see the location where your employee went to for this expense report. Same thing for the Default Charges tab. It'll tell you what project they were working on. If you look here, you want to verify that they are charging the correct project so you can approve it. The details regarding this expense report contains any revisions that they made. So if they've submitted their expense report and had to make a change, any revisions will appear here. Any warnings for the expense report are displayed here in this last tab. This typically tells you, you'll notice there aren't any warnings on mine, but normally this will tell you whether the project is outside of the period of performance. That way you know, gives you a better idea of whether or not they're charging the correct project. So now, as a supervisor, you have to approve your employees' expense reports. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to close out some of these things. And I'm actually going to log out of the system and log in as a supervisor. Now this supervisor that I'm logged in as has access to much more than what you'll probably see on your system. You'll probably see time and expense here. It may be at the top of your screen. Anything you don't have access to won't be shown here. So time and expense will probably appear at the top of your screen. So if I click on time and expense and go to expense, and then over to expense reports, you'll notice here under manage expense reports is where you go to fill out your own expense report. And then beneath that is manage/approve expense reports. Here's where you go to do approvals. The system is going to load any expense reports that I have outstanding for my users. At the top of the expense report, you have the option to filter it, either by outstanding tasks, or you can pick the specific status that you want to view. If you pick the status, the criteria below become enabled. Sometimes it's useful to fill out this information to limit what you're going to find in your result set. If I do a lookup here, if I click in here, the system will default to primary supervisor. Most of you on this call are probably set up as either a primary supervisor or potentially a backup supervisor. Only those roles that you are set up as over employees will appear here in this list. Your group will default to the All group. This will bring back all of your groups that you have that you're assigned a supervisor over. The next option down here is the type of expense report. If you remember from the training last week, we had an option of either doing all expenses, both travel and non-travel, monthly mileage expenses, or non-travel expenses. You can limit your approvals if you filter it based here. Of course, if you're looking for one specific employee, you can filter it by last name or their expense report ID if you happen to know that information. Whatever you select here becomes what your filter value is. You also have the option of doing a special filter. You can look for just those that are missing receipts or just those that are over your system-defined ceilings. If your employee has any unallowable charges, you can view those as well. This will limit the results that you have based on just that criteria. This middle section here shows you the status of the expense reports. It defaults to showing you the submitted and under review statuses. What under review means is that typically at least one approval has been done, but not all of the approvals have been done. So we have multiple levels of approvals on your expense reports. So potentially the first level has been done, but the second level has not. Once you've filled out this information, in order to see which expense reports fit this criteria, you go up to the top of the screen and you'll press this lightning bolt icon. This is the execute light icon, and it'll bring in all of your expense reports that fit your criteria. You can once again view the details of the expense report by highlighting it, and down below it shows you the details of each different type of expense. For this first one, there appears to be one expense for this expense report. There's this one of one listed down here under the claimed expenses section. I click on the next expense report. Looks like there's one there as well. My apologies. I'll pick, oh, sorry, there we go. We have 3 on this one. A lot of people like to view their overall expense report in a table view. What we're looking at right now under the claimed expenses is showing it in form view. On the right-hand side of the screen, if I click on the table button, it'll show you all the expenses on one screen. To look at the details, you can highlight it and then look in form view. Here's my airfare ticket. Here's the amount. At the bottom, if you remember us going through this last week, we have the charge allocation screen where you can see the GL accounts where it was hit. So to do the actual approval on the expense report, you're going to highlight the row, and down here in the bottom of this under the links, you'll go to the workflow section. When I click on that, this will show you all of the tasks that are due for this expense report. You'll notice there's a status column here where the recording of the receipt, the first 3 tasks are done, they're completed. The employee has a couple of tasks to create an expense report, to submit it, and to do some attachments. You'll notice those are completed as well. Now notice I highlighted the primary supervisor role to do the approval, but for this expense report, it's not allowing me to do the approval because an attachment is still due. It's still pending. So approvals cannot be done until all attachments have been made. If you remember from last week, the employee can now add several different attachments onto a single expense report. So we're still waiting to get one more attachment before this can be approved. Find one that's under review as well. So this one, expense report 4, my trip to Boston, it appears that all my other tasks are completed. To approve this expense report, my job now is under the primary supervisor. My task is to approve the expense report. I'm going to highlight the row, and you'll notice the perform selected task or reject selected task options are now available. I can either approve it or reject it. I'm hitting the approve button, getting this verbiage that says, again, you're approving this, you're approving it according to the rules with the company policies and procedures on the day and the charges that were specified, and I'll say OK. Again, brings me back to the header. I can notice if I scroll back down to the workflow, now my task has been completed. This expense report has a dual level of approval, where the business office also has to approve the expense report. They will not be notified that their approval is ready until you do your approval first. So theirs comes after yours. If you reject it, they'll never receive notification. The employee will, however, receive notification that you've rejected their expense report, and also why. If you reject it, you have to give it a reason why you're rejecting it. Are there any questions?
Not currently showing any questions. Again, if you'd like to ask a question, you can please type it into the Q&A box on the bottom left of the screen. Oh, we just had one question come in. Is there a more efficient way to ensure that all of the expenses in the given expense report are hitting the right charge code, or do you have to check each one individually?
Okay, that's a very good question. So probably the easiest way to look at the charge numbers that are used on the expense report, I'm going to scroll up a little bit, and again, we'll look at expense report 004 to Boston. There's a charge distribution link that'll give you one of the supporting schedules. So in this case, this expense report has one project because there's only one listed here, and it applies to each of these expenses. Any other questions?
Where can you write a reason for rejection?
Let's see. Good. Let me find one that is ready to be rejected. I can reject one that's, there we go. So in this case, again, I'm going to scroll up here so you can see it. This is expense report number 4 that I just approved. And it could be the case where you accidentally approved it and you actually mean to reject it. So the system actually allows you to reject one that you may have already approved. Again, that's done in case you make a mistake and accidentally hit the approve button. And so I hit the rejection button, and it's telling me down at the bottom that I have to enter a reason. I'm going to click on the error message, and it brings me right to the row where I need to go. And here's where I enter in my reason. I'm going to say wrong receipt. Now, because I've made a change to this expense report, I have to save it. The saves are located at the top on the left-hand side. I can either save it or I can save and continue, which will allow me to stay on this expense report and continue my review. Or still highlighted. Are there any other questions at this time?
Yes. Will supervisors receive notifications when employees submit an expense report? How will that notification be made?
Employees will get an email based on whatever email address has been set up in the T&E system.
Okay. If an employee enters the wrong charge code, which is caught by the approver, can the employee still access the expense report and change the charge code?
Yes, as long as the expense report hasn't been processed, and what process means is that it's been exported and imported into the financial system for payment. In this case, the financial system is Costpoint, so as long as that expense report does not have a status of processed, which is this column right here, it is available to make corrections. Now, if the expense report has been approved and the employee comes in and makes a change to that expense report, whether they change the project ID or whether they add an expense or change an amount on an expense, the status goes back to a draft mode and they have to resubmit it, and it has to go through the approval process again.
Do receipts still need to be consolidated into one file before uploading?
Chris, I can grab this one if that's okay.
Okay.
So in reference to this, we have two options in the new system, which is fantastic. One is that folks can keep with the old process and consolidate all their receipts into one PDF document and then submit it into the system. Or they can also input multiple documents for the multiple expenses. It's not going to be one or the other that has to be. The employees will have an option to do both. So it will be upon the supervisor and then our team on the expense report side to ensure that we're taking a look at all the documentation to see if it's either one. So if it's in multiple or if it's in one, we'll make sure that our team is reviewing it all.
Will the system give you an error if you provide the wrong charge code?
It does not know specifically what charge code should be used, so at the time it won't give you an error that you've charged the wrong one. If that charge code is outside of the period of performance, it'll give you a warning letting you know that it's outside the end date of the period of performance for that project. As often is the case, expenses come in after the end date, so usually it's kept open a little bit longer, but they do get a warning if they've gone outside that period of performance.
How do you pull up receipts while viewing the expense report?
So to look at receipts, I'll find it here. Under the workflow status, which is, I think I'm in here, there we go. Let me find it. Okay, so this button should enable, let's see. Oh, sorry, it's the wrong row. My apologies. Here we go. So if I am in somebody's expense report, I'm going to go down to their receipt row, and then I can view their attachment right here. And click on it here. Now, in my case, I believe I did one expense per. Over here. There we go. So then you can view the receipt. So the task item would be attachment that you're looking for, where you can view each individual attachment. Are there any other questions?
Can you show where to upload a full package of receipts as opposed to uploading individual receipts for each expense?
Sure. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually do a new expense report. I believe all the ones we're looking at are already submitted expense reports. So actually give me 1 second. Let me scoot off to the side here, and I'm actually going to create a file that can take, well, I'm going to have a file here that has multiple expenses on it. So give me 1 second to upload one here. All right, let's do this. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start a new expense report for myself, because the employee can enter in their own receipts. Okay. So I'm basically just setting up an expense report that we can look at. Those of you that didn't attend those other trainings, I'm just actually filling it out. I'm filling out my header information. I have something in my favorite locations. Here in my charge number. Okay. So actually this project that I selected is one of the warning messages that you get that it's outside of the period of performance. So again, it's a warning, so you can bypass it. You can continue on entering the expense or filling out the expense report. Now what I'll do is I'll enter in some expenses. I'll do an airline ticket. And again, for those of you that weren't available to attend the user training, I'm actually filling out whether it's billable versus not billable for my direct stuff. Here's my warning message again that it's outside the period of performance. Now I'm going to enter in a second expense. And this time I'll do lodging. My lodging category, and then my lodging expense type. Okay, so now I have two expenses onto my expense report. Close out of my message there. I'm going to put it into table view so you can see them both at the same time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight both rows. You'll notice they're both in blue over here on the left-hand side. Then I'll come to the bottom where it says attachment. In the lower right-hand corner, there's an attachment link. I'm going to do a new row and pick my attachment type. And then I'm going to upload my attachment. Give me 1 second to open up my receipt here and find another PDF file to add to it. Let me just save this. Now the system will is requiring that you save it as a PDF file. So I'm going to save my file as a PDF. That way we can attach to an expense report. Okay. So I have both of my rows highlighted. I'm going to pick my file. Here's my multiple receipts, and I'll upload it. And you'll know the file has been uploaded once the file name appears. So we can then view it. Open it up. Now in my case, this is the same exact receipt, but if we pretend that it's two different receipts, you can link them onto one file. That way you can view it on either one. Are there any other questions?
Yes. Will supervisors have the ability to add or remove charge codes that employees access in their accounts? For example, we sometimes want to grant temporary access to a management ODC code.
So the charge codes are done on the Costpoint side, which is their financial system side. I believe we're taking advantage of the project workforce. They need to be added from the workforce. We couldn't add them here in the T&E system for that purpose.
Okay. Will expense reports needing approval still pop up in the My Tasks section?
Yes, they will. Let me take you right now to your desktop. I'm going to scroll up to the top. I'm going to save my expense report just so we have it. And I'll close out of the expense report system. I'm actually going to close out of this manage and approve expense report as well. So to get to your desktop, that's now located under configuration and then resources and then manage my desktop. Now in your case, for the most part, your time and expense will be at the top on the left-hand side. You'll have access to time, expense, and configuration because of course you have to fill out your own timesheet and your own expense report. And under the resource section here in the middle, you'll probably only have access to this resources. So you won't have to see all of this information that's shown. You'll go right to here on the right-hand side where it says Manage My Desktop. And here you can see all the different expense reports that are needed. In this example, I've got one, it looks like, left to be approved. Here's my approval task. So I have one left that has to be approved. I can access this by highlighting the row on the left-hand side, turning it blue, and hitting the launch button. That takes me to this Manage Approve Expense Reports, and here's where I can view it and I can do my approvals. And again, to do the approval, I'll highlight the row, and I'll go down here under Workflow. And there's my tasks. And it looks like I just had that one that needed to do approving. I have a few sitting out there for submission or to record the attachments, but that's the only one I had to approve. Are there any other questions?
We have one last question showing, where would incidentals be included?
So incidentals are part of the meal and incidental expense or the per diem expenses. Let me log out of here or get out of the desktop and I can show you here, going to my expense report. So in this case, this is the one I just did, and it contained a transportation or an airline ticket and a lodging. So let me add a new expense for my per diem, just so you can see the incidental amounts. So I've added a meal category in my per diem meals. Over here on the right-hand side in this table is your incidental amount. For all U.S. locations, it's a standard $5 a day. International locations, it varies based on the city and the country.
Are there any other questions today?
Okay.
I'm not showing any questions at this moment.
Okay. So the most important thing you have to remember is now is to go to a different screen to actually approve expense reports. To fill out your own expense report, manage expense reports, and to approve them, you go to manage or approve, approve expense reports. So two different screens. You can also print. I should point this out as well. Last week I mentioned under here under the functional role, it defaults to the word self, so you're printing your own expense reports. But if you are a supervisor, I can click in the field and use the magnifying glass to highlight it. These are all the functional roles, or the roles I have over other people. For the most part, you'll probably go in as the primary supervisor. Then you can select what types of expense reports you want to print. You can filter it either by last name or expense report ID. ASCII is not using the expense authorization, so you can ignore that option. But you can filter it based on either the name or the ID. You can also do the special filters here, missing receipts, oversealing, unallowable, interim signature. Now the system also defaults to all the statuses being checked. So you may want to uncheck ones if you want to print out a bulk set. So if I hit the printer button, which is up here at the top of the screen, the first printer you see here is the print option section. Here you can either elect to print to a printer or printing it to a file, to a PDF file. So you can opt to set this up here. I can preview it by putting this button here, and the actual printer is to the right of it here. So if we preview it, let me pick my group. If there's anything out there, there we go. We do the preview. And the expense reports, probably the printed options look probably very similar to what you're used to seeing. In this case, I printed all of them. I have 15 pages of them. Are there any other questions?
Yes. Is it possible to show us how to do a search? For example, I want to look up a specific expense report number.
Sure. You mean, and can we clarify that? Do you mean when we're printing an expense report?
Chris, I think, so in our current system, just in the event that a supervisor has a whole host of staff members and they wanted to run a search based off of an expense report that one of their staff members emailed them specifically, are they able to just run a search by a number like we are in the current system, or is the only way for them to search it through their dashboard that you showed earlier?
Okay, let's see. I'm not sure. Let me close out of the printing screen. Let me close out of the expense report. We'll take a look at the manage approve screen. If we have the option of doing it on expense report numbers. Let me, status here, I'm going to change it, primary supervisor. Okay, yeah, so unfortunately, I'm not given a lookup option here to filter it based on the expense report ID. I have to actually know what the expense report ID is to print it, or to view it, sorry. Is there anything else I can answer today?
We don't currently have any other questions.
Okay. Well, thank you all, everyone, for attending the supervisor training today. I should note that I am still working on setting up, I've got the supervisor set up in the system. I have about 20 more to change your rights of what, as far as what screens you can see. Just about done with that. I had to stop, of course, for this training session just now. I should have that finished. I'm also working on making sure that the proper employees are linked to each supervisor. I should have that done hopefully either by the end of the day today or by tomorrow morning. Have everybody set up so you can look at your employees' expense reports that come in. Please note that this screen here or this system will only contain expense reports that people have filled out starting today. So any expense reports they filled out last week, you still have to access the old T&E system to get to those expense reports.
Okay, and we have a few additional admin notes. If you or any of your employees are having difficulties with Costpoint, we do have an email set up. It's costpointhelp@afc.com. Feel free to send an email and they can assist you there. We also have another supervisor session scheduled for December 27th at 10 a.m. Eastern if you would like to attend again or if you have any other staff members that need to participate in the supervisor training. And lastly, we will be scheduling a refresher or a catch-up session for the expense report around mid to late January, so keep an eye out for additional information about that. I think that is it for today. Oh, stand by for 1 second. Okay.
Just as a reminder, we understand that this is expense report training for supervisors, and some staff actually don't handle expense reports on a regular basis. As we are heading into the new system that will be fully functional on January 1 for timesheets as well, it is a good recommendation just to ensure that your staff have logged in successfully prior to the Jan 1 deadline, and they have also received the emails for that communication with regard to their passwords established. So if you don't have that, then reach out to the same Costpoint help@afc.com email.
Okay, and I think that is it. Thank you everyone for attending today. I hope you have a great rest of the day.
Great. Thank you.